Okay, I think it's recording now. Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Coach Ulises Garcia, and now we're proud to present Coach Dan Casey, that's going to spend some time with us, explaining some program building philosophy and all you need to know to start and make good foundation for your team. So, Coach, it's a pleasure to have you here. I know I really appreciate you giving some of your time of your day and speak with us and to learn from you. It's a really good thing. So, thank you for being here, Coach.
Yeah, Coach Garcia, I really appreciate you having me. I appreciate all the work you're doing to help the game grow internationally. I was telling you right before we got started on this, but I actually had a great experience down in Monterrey, Mexico in 2016. I was part of the USA football team that went down there to play in the World University Championships, and we ended up in the finals against the team from Mexico, and they beat us pretty good. And it was really cool. I mean, obviously I was bummed that we lost, but it was cool to see just how much the game has developed down there and how talented the athletes are, how good the coaches are. I mean, I walked away from that experience in 2016 so impressed. And then 2 years later, I ended up going to China, and same deal, same experience. And it's really, I think one of the things that gets me really excited is seeing the game spread outside the U.S. because obviously it's a big deal in America, but I love seeing people from other places play the game and really grow to love it. So when Coach Garcia reached out to me, I was really excited about it, and anything I can do to help the game grow across the world is something I want to do. So I'm really excited to get to spend some time with you guys today.
Thank you, Coach. And well, let's get into the presentation. And if I have some questions or everything, well, I may interrupt you.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, you can always do that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here with you guys. And the presentation that I'm giving today really has a lot to do with understanding who you are as a coach and really how to get started. I call it personal to practical, and it's really just advice for first time or aspiring head football coaches, whether you're coaching a middle school team or a Pop Warner youth team, or all the way up through high school and college. I think some of these principles really hold true no matter what level you're coaching at. I think it's about really understanding yourself and then being able to best teach and equip your athletes to do the things that you need to get them to do on the field. And so one of the things that's had a huge influence on me, I'm sure you're surprised to see a tennis player photographed in a football presentation, but there's a great book, and I'll probably give you several book recommendations today, but there's a great book called The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Galway. And it's had a huge influence on me and just the way I think about not just football, but sports in general. And even teaching, because I think one of the things we have to remember is that football coaches are teachers. Football is such a unique sport because so much of the learning happens in a classroom setting. So when we meet as a team, it's, a lot of other games, you show up at the court or show up at the field and you play ball. Football has a very academic quality to it. And so I think it's important to remember that as coaches, we are teachers, and we're teaching techniques, we're teaching schemes, we're teaching mindset, mentality, psychology. I mean, I just think football coaches are amazing because they have to know so much about so many different topics, and they have so many guys on that team. So you're having to think through human performance and strength and conditioning. You're having to think through scheme. You're having to think through all of these different things. And so hopefully what I'm able to do today with you guys is just talk through where to get started, because that was something I really struggled with. When I started, I was 24 years old when I got my first head coaching job as a high school coach, and I really had no idea what I was doing. And so I really wanted to really distill down some of the things that I've learned over the past few years and help you get started or just keep going on wherever you're at. And so this quote from Tim Galway is really great, I think, because he says, for the teacher or coach, the question has to be how to give instructions in such a way as to help the natural learning process of the student and not interfere with it. And I think that's something really important for us as coaches to consider, is how do we, when we're teaching our players, how do we get them in the positive cycle of their natural learning process so that things come easier to them instead of us always fighting uphill against the way our athletes learn. And Tim Galway has, the book is called The Inner Game of Tennis, but it's really more like the inner game of life. And he talks about the inner game, and there's an inner game for the coach, but there's also an inner game for the athlete. And he basically says that every human being has two selves talking to themselves at any one time. So you have the self one, which is, he calls the teller. And so this is the voice in your head that's maybe criticizing you or critiquing you or telling you what to do or what not to do. And a lot of times what we find, at least what I find when I'm coaching my, is the coach or the athletes that are struggling on the field because they're thinking too much and not playing the game are the ones that are so involved in self one, and they're thinking way too much that they're not able to be effective playing the game. Then Tim Galway also talks about self two, which is the doer. And so, when you think of the athlete team that are really instinctive, that are making plays almost without even thinking about it, those are self two type players, the players that are very instinctive, that aren't thinking too much. They're really just experiencing the game and playing it full speed. And so really, I think the goal of any coach is to try and give an athlete enough technique and enough information to be able to ultimately, by the time you get to the game, silence that voice in your head that's the teller, the self one that's trying to give you all these instructions and everything on the field, and really allow self two to just be free to play the game. And so I really appreciate this perspective, because even as a coach, I call the offense, I'm the offensive coordinator. So even as a coach, my mind is often turning, and a lot of times what'll happen is I'll call a play and it will or will not be successful. And I will go back in my mind and I'll try and think, like, what should I have done differently right in the middle of the drive? But in football, you really have to leave the last play behind, and you have to be in the present moment. And so there's an inner game for a coach as well, of also turning off that self one, that like critique voice in your head, and really be able to live in the moment and say, it's on to the next play. We have to stay focused on the moment instead of getting lost in the past or worried about the future. We need to really stay in the moment. And so one of the things that I just really believe as a coach is that I'm training my athletes to be present in the moment. And I'm also training myself to be present in the moment, because football happens one play at a time. And if you get too concerned about the future or too worried about the past, your team is going to suffer. So that, I hope that kind of sets the table for some of the things that I'm going to talk about, because what I'm hoping to do is moving us from a personal look at ourselves and how we can be better as people and as coaches, and how that'll ultimately affect our program in very practical ways and the things that we're doing. So I'd love to just start off with the personal. And one of the questions that I always am asking myself, and even asking other coaches, is, who are you? I think a lot of coaches get caught up in trying to be like somebody else. There's never going to be another Nick Saban. There's never going to be another Bill Belichick. Those guys are so unique, and they're very true to themselves. And what I think you found is the people that have tried to say, I'm going to be just like Bill Belichick, or I'm going to be just like Nick Saban, have not had nearly the success that Coach Saban and Coach Belichick have had. And it's because I think what happens is they get caught up in trying to emulate someone, and they're not able to be themselves. And ultimately, if you're not being yourself as a coach, eventually what's going to happen is it's going to break down, and people are going to realize that you're faking it, essentially. And that happens really quickly, especially with modern athletes. They realize that you're not genuine, and they realize you're trying to be someone you're not. The quote that I actually got from Jerome Gay, he's my pastor here in Raleigh, and he says, no matter where you go, you have to take you with you. And I used to think that maybe if I got a new job or worked with a new group of kids, or if I moved locations or did something different, then all of a sudden my talents would come into focus and everyone would see me for who I really am, and it would all work out fine. But the reality is that a change in location or a change in responsibility will not fundamentally change who you are at your core. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember, that even you may not have a job that you particularly like right now as a coach. Maybe you're a position coach and you want to be a coordinator. Maybe you're a coordinator and you want to be a head coach. Maybe you're like me and you're a head coach, but you have aspirations of being a coach at a bigger school or a different program. And if you're not investing in who you are in the present moment, and you're thinking too much about the future, or again, like getting concerned about the past, you're going to suffer. And really, I think the most important thing you can do is work on yourself exactly where you are. And I'm sure you've heard coaches say, be where your feet are, that no matter what you're doing, like do the best job you can do wherever you are currently. And I think that's good advice, but I think even more so than just being where your feet are, invest in yourself wherever you are. Invest in your development as a person and as a coach. And so the two ways that I think are important to invest is, one, I know it sounds kind of crazy coming from a football coach, but if you can invest in some sort of counseling, I think that's a huge impact on me, because I've realized that there are, I think as a parent, you realize I have two kids, but as a parent, I realize the things that I struggle with ultimately get passed down to my kids, because if I get frustrated over certain situations, I sometimes will, like they'll feel my anxiety or feel my stress or feel my frustration. And the same is true with our players. Like if we're carrying a whole bunch of tough stuff through life, if we're holding on to a bunch of things, our players eventually get whatever that is. So you may outburst in anger, and who's on the receiving end of that anger? It's your players. And so I think it's really important to deal with what's going on with you, so that you're not mistreating your players, or you're not that you really can give them everything you can. And then the other is mentorship. And I think a lot of coaches, when they think of being mentored, they think of, well, I want to find a coach who I admire, who's further along in their career, and I want them to mentor me to be a better coach. I actually don't really ascribe to that philosophy. I think you're most benefited if your mentor or your counselor is outside of the game of football. Because I think sometimes us football coaches, we get these blinders on our head, and we say, like, all we're thinking about are schemes and how to get our players better. And we're thinking about all these things that are very football specific. But ultimately, the best solutions that I've come up with for my teams have come from outside sources. I have a mentor who's 88 years old. He lives out in Denver, Colorado. We talk every 2 weeks. And there have been times where I'm having an issue with a player or a parent or whatever, and I'll take it to him. And he doesn't know anything about football, but he helps me deal with human beings, because football ultimately is a gigantic collection of human beings from different backgrounds and different upbringings, and we have to find a way to make them a cohesive unit. And so sometimes there's a kind of a sense of urgency to find mentorship within football circles, but I'm actually encouraging you to go outside of football circles. Find people that can help you deal with human beings, because that's ultimately what we're all doing. We're dealing with human beings and trying to figure out how to make them operate as a unit. So counseling and mentorship, that's for you. Like, that's to make you a better person. And that's why I think it goes back to the inner game. It's, the inner game is, obviously there's the external game, right? The outer game where you either win or you lose. But the inner game is something that no matter whether you're coaching football or you're owning a business or you're a student or whatever, that those skills that you've developed to better yourself are going to carry over no matter what you're doing. And football is just an avenue to get better as people, I think. So I think personally, a lot of my mentors come from outside of the game of football, but where I do transition over to football is heroes. I think heroes are really important. And I think there's a difference between heroes and mentors, because the reality is you may have a coach you really admire, but if you're rising in your career, that coach is not going to give you any more information because they don't want to lose to you. And so there's a limit to how much you can actually learn from a football coach. But what I think you can do is you can have heroes where you can study what they've done, where they've been, how they've handled situations, and really become a student of who that person is. And there's a great poem called Ulysses by Tennyson, who's a poet. And he says this quote, he says, "I am a part of all that I have met." And essentially what he's saying is every person that I've interacted with has made me who I am today. And every coach that we study is part of who we are as a coach. And so I think that's a really important thing, that the people you decide to study are going to influence how you call plays, how you run your program, how you handle strength and conditioning. So it's really important to carefully select your heroes. Don't just select heroes based on how many Super Bowls they won or how many national championships they have. Because the reality is you may find somebody who your personality better than Bill Belichick or Nick Saban. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be your heroes. They're great heroes. But one of the people that really stands out to me is Bill Walsh. I think he's become kind of a hero of mine, even though he's not even coaching anymore. But going back and studying the way he thought about the game, the way he handled situations with players, there's some things I like, some things I don't, but I'm digging into who he was and some of the things that he's written, and he's become somewhat of a hero of mine. And so the reality is we all have those people we look up to. And I think it's important that we decide who our heroes are and really study those people. And that's why I say declare your major and fulfill the course requirements. And what I mean by this is, if you're in school, you have a focus. Maybe you want to be a doctor, so you go to medical school, or you want to be a teacher and you study education. So with football coaches, you may have a direction you want to head in. Maybe you want to study the West Coast offense. And so you want to study coaches that are in that arena. Or maybe you want to study the triple option. And so you study Paul Johnson and people in that coaching tree. And so what I mean is when you decide on who your heroes are and some of the things that they're doing, really dive in and go deep with those coaches instead of staying on the surface with everyone and saying, well, I like what Lincoln Riley does here, and I like what Ken Niumatalolo does here. I like this and that. But I would say focus in on a couple particular coaches and really study what they're doing. Try and watch their game film. A lot of times what you can do is you can go on YouTube and you can listen to their press conferences and just the way they talk and the interviews and interactions with players, and just study them, pick apart all of the information you can find. And that's the beauty of the internet. You can find so many things about these guys now, which I would just encourage you to dig in. And another thing I think is I have learned the most from the mistakes and failures of my heroes. And so there are times, if you watch stories about Bill Walsh or stories about other coaches where they had moments where they were struggling, or moments when they faced failure, how did they respond to that? How did they change their strategy? There's a great story of Dick Vermeil, who was the coach of and he made a huge shift in his coaching philosophy between 98 and 99, the year they won the Super Bowl. And the shift was that he was going to basically treat his players better, have more efficient, shorter practices. And he really made some major shifts, and that actually led to some serious success in his life. So learn from some of the mistakes and failures and how they responded to those from your heroes, and then ultimately focus more on how these coaches got to where they got instead of exactly what they were doing. So, you may really fall in love with a particular coach's scheme, but the reality is that scheme was probably devised for a particular reason. The air raid came from Hal Mummy, and a big reason for that was because he had, smaller, less talented athletes that he needed to find a way to move the football with. So really, really figure out how they got to where they were, and not just what they're doing. I think sometimes we get caught up in those schemes so much that we forget the how behind it and how they got to where they were. And then another thing I think that's important for coaches as they're growing is to create a level of sustainable growth. I think football has a culture that says you go hard, you go as hard as you can all the time, push hard and work hard. Like that's what we need to do. And I think that obviously hard work is a very important thing, but one of the things that Aristotle says, he says we're the sum of our actions, and therefore our habits make all the difference. And so I think it's about, as coaches, it's about developing habits I say it here, I say go with the grain of your personality type. So develop habits that are sustainable in your life. I think, there are some coaches, again, if you're trying to emulate someone else, you say, well, Kirby Smart shows up at the office at this time and does this much. And that may work really well for Kirby Smart, but it may not work as well for you. Maybe you have a different personality type. Maybe your family is structured a little bit differently, and you need to make sure you're able to spend time with your kids. So make sure your habits are sustainable within your life. And so for me, I have a couple habits that I just try and do every single day. And I realize I'm not going to get everything done in one day, but I need to space it out throughout the year, that if I chip away a little bit at a time, I'm able to make really big growth over time. And one of the things that I really do believe, and I believe this with my players especially, is that shame is a short-term motivator. So if you feel like basically if you're just down on yourself all the time, like in the short term, it will cause you to work harder and go harder. But ultimately you want joy and excitement and passion for the game to be what's the ultimate driver in your habits. So, if you're dreading going in and watching film, if you're dreading game planning, if you're dreading practice, there's a problem there. And you may be, saying to yourself, well, I'm a football coach, I need to suck it up and I need to just get this thing done. I think that over time you see a lot of burnout happening with coaches. And so if you want to be in this thing for the long haul, develop sustainable habits that work with your personality type. And I tell my wife all the time, I want to be coaching till I'm 80 years old. And so that means, I can't burn out by the time I'm 45. And there are some coaches out there that are burning out by the time they're 45. And so it may mean not taking certain jobs. It may mean only working with certain people. There's a lot of things it might mean, but I think coaches can make the biggest difference in people's lives. And it's a real shame when really good coaches burn out and retire at the age of 50. And so I'm hoping even wherever you are, that you're establishing a culture where you can be in it for a long, long time and not feel this constant pressure to basically abandon who you are and work yourself so hard that you basically can't be involved in the game anymore. I think that's a real shame. But one of the ways I think that you can develop these habits is to create systems. And again, for me, it's all about sustainability, and it's all about automation. And what I mean by automation is I want to put something in place and then not have to think about it anymore. That's just what I do. So for example, these are two kind of silly things that I do every single day, but I just know every single day when I wake up, I'm going to do this at some point during the day. I'm going to read 10 pages of some book, any book. I just want to make sure I'm reading every day, because I think reading is one of the best ways to grow as a person, as a coach, in all these different areas. And then for some of you guys, you may follow me on Twitter. I try and post one play a day and try and understand it and try and be able to explain it to people. And so that's just a habit I have. It's a habit that I do every single day, and it's sustainable for me. It doesn't take a lot of time away from my family, but it's a way that I know I'm going to get personal growth. Now I realize this is completely about personal growth for me. It's not necessarily part of my job, but it's something I try and do to just maintain that growth cycle. And over time, it's really grown for me into having a level of understanding of the game that I never would have had if I just tried to learn everything in a month, or tried to, or maybe just taken months off from the game of football after the season. So it's just a way for me to stay involved with the game, but not burn myself out. And so I really just go back to that Ben Franklin quote that says, "Little strokes fell great oaks." We have this picture of chopping down a tree. You're not gonna so hard that you just knock the tree. You just have to chip away at it each day. And so that's something I really believe in. That it's just a little bit each day, and you can make huge progress if you chip away a little bit each day. And I think that's important for coaches to remember that, I think I've posted a play almost every day for 3 or 4 years, maybe. I don't know if it's that long, but it feels like it sometimes. And I feel like I've grown a lot in my knowledge of the game of football through it. And there are still days I wake up and feel like I know nothing about football. And you're going to have those feelings, but you have to trust your process of learning, and you have to keep showing up every day. And so for me, I just keep showing up every day, keep trying to learn one thing each day, one thing I didn't understand the day before. And over time, you make huge progress, but it's going to take time. And I think if you have that long-term perspective that you're in it for the long haul, you're going to be able to create those systems, and you set an attainable daily goal, and you do it every single day. And I think it's a really important thing for coaches to develop. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift away from kind of the personal to the practical. Okay, you've worked on yourself. You've gotten to know who you are. You've established mentors. You've found your heroes. You've studied the game like crazy. And now you have an opportunity. Maybe you're a head football coach now. And this is more geared for head coaches, but I think it's relevant for first-time coordinators or even first-time coaches in general. But it's particularly for head coaches, I think. And so, I think if you haven't put in the personal work, the practical program development stuff may not serve you so well. I think it's really important to put in the personal work. And the reality is, I'm saying all of this, and I got my first head coaching job at 24 years old and hadn't done any of the work. Didn't know who I was. Didn't even know who my heroes were. I played defense in college, and all of a sudden I was the offensive coordinator. So you want to talk about someone who knew nothing. That was me when I first got my head coaching job. And now, as I reflect back, I had to really work on the personal side of things the past few years as I was a head coach, and really figure a lot of things out. So from a practical perspective, I always that in order to have a successful program, you need to start strong. And one of my favorite books when it comes to coaching or just development in general is the book Essentialism by Greg McKeown. And he says the word priority came into the English language in the 1400s. It was singular. It meant the very first or prior thing, and it stayed singular for the next 500 years. But now what you hear all these coaches saying is we have all of these priorities, and you hear these businesses talking about all the priorities they have. The reality is if you have a long list of priorities, you have priorities. You have one priority as a coach. And you really have to set the intention of what do you care most about? What is this job going to be about for you? And I always tell people, again, it's about who you are and understanding who you are. If you don't believe in something, don't do it. Don't just do something because everyone else does something. There's so many ways to be a successful football coach. There's so many different schemes you can run. There's so many different ways that you can build program culture. But ultimately, you have to personally believe in it and be able to communicate that belief to your athletes so that they buy in. I've played for coaches in the past where you could tell they did not have conviction about the things that they were presenting in front of the team. They had taken it from somebody else. And I think it's really important that you have things that are very particular to you so that your players buy in. Because if players don't buy in, it doesn't matter how good of a coach you are, you're not going to be successful. There's not a single coach that I've ever run into that has won in spite of their players. You win because of your players, and they have to buy into what you're doing. So if you don't believe in it, don't do it. So say you get your first head coaching job. I believe that it's kind of like if you've been elected the president of your country or whatever, you have a first 100 days. Everyone's excited that you're there. Everyone's pumped up that you're the new guy in charge. You have those first 100 days to put your big initiatives up front. Say, this is what I want to do. Maybe it's facilities. Maybe it's weight room. Maybe it's hiring coaches. Maybe it's, I don't exactly know what that looks like for you, but what are your big initiatives? What are you going to put up front in those first 100 days to really get the ball rolling? And then you may have other things that you think are important, but the rest of that has to happen by diffusion. And what I mean by diffusion is you just have to let those things happen over time. So like for me as a coach, when I got the job at St. David's, I knew some things were really important to me. One is I wanted to grow our roster. So I wanted players from other sports to come play football for us. I wanted lacrosse players and baseball players and basketball players to come and play football. And so one of the big priorities for me was I wanted to create a program that was exciting and accessible for them, so that they would say, I want to play. This looks like it's going to be fun. It looks like they're going to open up the offense and try and score a lot of points. It looks like the practices aren't going to be way too long. And another thing for me was I wanted player safety to be a priority. And so we told the parents up front, we said, we know you're concerned about the health and safety of we told the parents of the players, we know you're concerned about the health and safety of your son. We want him to play. And we're going to do everything in our power to throughout the week. Obviously for us, we play on Friday night. If someone gets injured on Friday night, I can't control that. But in some ways I can control the health and safety of my players throughout the week. And so we were very careful with how often we hit in practice. We were very careful about having trainers and fluids and everything to keep it safe as possible. Because again, my priority was I want as many kids to play football as possible. I want to increase the size of my roster. I want to make sure we're having fun. I want other kids from other sports to come and play and not feel like football was an exclusive event. Football was for everybody. So that was my big initiative. And then the rest had to happen by diffusion. Some of the things like focus on speed instead of just getting big and bulky in the weight room. I wanted fast players on my team. Other things like some of the scheme stuff that we've done, some of the culture stuff we've done, it had to happen over time. I couldn't make 15 different initiatives. I had to be very focused on, we want to make this program accessible. We want a lot of kids to come and play. So that was kind of my first 100 days. And I've kept those initiatives going. And then I've added in other things as time has gone on and as people have grown to trust me a little bit more. I've added in some other things that are hopefully helpful for our players. And then this is another interesting idea is I think it's really important. You have to know your context. Every coach enters into a school or a program or a team that is very context dependent. So for example, I don't know if any of you guys heard Dave Clawson speak at the AFCA convention in January, but one of the things that he did is he talked about the different places he'd been at Bowling Green and Richmond and Wake Forest, and he'd been at different places, and he'd done something different at each of those places because he had certain types of players at one school and different types of players at another school. And every program was dependent on the kind of kids he was getting, and how he was working with the community and recruiting and all of those things. And one of the things that I tell people all the time is that if you get a new job, the best way to signal a change in the program is with a new offense. And I know defensive guys are probably aren't going to want to hear that, but if you are taking over a program and you want it to be different than it was, you kind of have to do something offensively that's different than what they've done in the past. That's just my opinion. And again, that doesn't have to be something incredibly drastic, but for the casual fan in the stands, they see the offense, and the offense is indicative of what else is happening in the program. So even if all you care about is defense, if you're a defensive coordinator, all you care about is defense, then bring in an offensive coordinator that's going to infuse some life into your offense and just give some different looks. Maybe that means spending more time in spread or under center, or maybe giving some option looks, or, I just think that's what the fans are seeing. That's what the parents and the administrators are seeing. And you just have to be aware of those things as a head coach, that it matters what the casual observers are thinking, because in a lot of ways, even within the coaching community, we respect coaches that teach really well. But the reality is the outside observers in the world, they care about very few things. They care about, does the offense look different? Does the team have energy? Is everybody on the same page? And are the players generally behaving and doing well in school? So we just have to remember that things inside the program and things outside the program are perceived differently. So we just have to be aware of those things. I'm not saying you need to abandon who you are, but the best way to signal a change is with a new offense. That's my opinion. I also think it's really important to differentiate between, when you show up to a new place, differentiate between tradition and convention. So tradition, every program or every team has these traditions that they've maybe done for 10 years, maybe 50 years. It totally depends on your context again. But when I start at a program and I'm digging and I'm saying, like, what are these traditions about? When I dig and ask questions about those traditions, what I get is some really interesting answers that give a lot of depth to the school or the place or the program I'm at, and help me understand the place I'm at even better. So I don't exactly know what those traditions might look like for you. Maybe you do. You have a particular walk on game day, but you have a special jersey you wear on a certain. Maybe you have to talk about your rivalry game. Whatever the case may be, if you dig on those traditions, you're going to find out a lot about the place you're at. The problem is if it's just a convention, if people are basically saying, well, we've just always done it that way, the more you dig, the more you'll realize that this has no leg to stand on. This creates more confusion. I never accept the phrase, this is how we've always done it. If people are telling me that, then I immediately say, I don't think we should be doing it anymore. If that's the only reason we're doing it, because it's always been done that way, then we shouldn't do it anymore. We should move on from that. But if somebody can give me a compelling reason of why we're doing some of these traditions, then by all means, let's keep it, because that adds richness and depth to the program, and something that connects people that used to play at the program to where it is now. And if you're at a new program or a new team that doesn't have any traditions, I would encourage you to start some meaningful traditions because that connection, so that when players leave the team and come back years later, they still feel like there's something meaningful there. And even if you're with a youth team, you can develop traditions even in the first year that can be really meaningful to the players. And then ultimately, I think compromise is really important. If you're working at a place, work toward alignment with people. Ultimately, you want everyone pushing in the same direction. You want everybody. You're not always going to agree on everything, but you want everybody working together for the common good. And so sometimes that means you're backing off a little bit. Sometimes that means you're pushing a little bit, but always work with people instead of working against people. I think that's really important when you're trying to build a program. Another thing that I talk about a lot and think about a lot is flexibility and familiarity. And there's a great book by Ray Dalio, who's a CEO and a financial investor. And he basically says he's created this system that holds up the idea of an idea meritocracy, which basically means the best idea wins. So no matter who comes up with the best idea wins. So the best idea is determined by the quantity and quality of the data, not by the positional power. So for me as a coach, one of the things that I always wanted to do with my assistants is saying, we want the best idea to go out there on the field. And so if that means it comes from my cornerbacks coach or it comes from me, it shouldn't matter. Whatever the best idea is should win. And really giving people the confidence to use their voice and say, I think we should try this. And ultimately, you know, it does end with the final decision comes to the head coach, but the head coach needs to create an environment that says, I want your voice, I want your input, because we want the best on the field whenever we play. And I think it's important to, within this idea of an idea meritocracy, the best idea wins, I think it's important to remember that the best idea within the previously established framework must win. And what I mean by that is, as coaches at the beginning of a season, we get together and say, we're going to run this kind of offense and this kind of defense, and this is the direction we're moving. And you may, as a coach who's lower on the totem pole, you may say, man, I saw this play that Oklahoma ran, and I really think we should run it. And it may be a great idea, but is that your offense? So you have to ask yourself, is this idea, does it work within what we've already agreed upon? We already agreed upon this is the direction we're going, and is my idea helping basically make that previously established framework even stronger and better? And so particularly as a head coach, I think it's really important to give everyone a voice. But once you leave the meeting, once you guys as a staff are done meeting, you need to own the final decision as a group and say, this is the direction we're going, even if there's some disagreement still there. And so I think that's really important. We had a really interesting moment last season when we were in the state semifinals, and me and my coaches, we tried to develop this idea of an idea meritocracy where the best idea wins. And we were driving the field late. We were down by 4 points, I think it was. Driving the field, we needed a touchdown to win. Got in a 4th and 11 situation. So the game was on the line. It was, we either converted or we lost the game, and our season was over. And my co-offensive coordinator, who's up in the booth, called down and said, I think we should run this. And he said, but ultimately, you make the final decision. So whatever you think is best, like, go with that. And I ended up calling a play that didn't work on 4th and 11, and we didn't convert. And I kind of regretted not going with his idea because it was a pretty good idea. But I think it just spoke to the culture we had as a staff, where my guys understood they're always welcome to bring an idea, but they also respected the fact that I have to live with the final decision and own it. And they were going to respect it, but they were always going to give their input. And so I think that's just an important culture to develop within your program, of not trying to undermine people, but trying to find the best idea in any given situation, but then ultimately supporting the head coach or the coordinator and saying, you're ultimately responsible for the final decision. And it's a fine line to walk. It's hard, but I think the best coaching staffs really have that intense back and forth, but then ultimately, but when they make that final decision, they ride together. And I think that's important. And then what we try and do is we try and establish the plus minus rule as much as we can. If you add something, delete something. So I think a lot of coaches get into trouble when they just keep adding and adding and adding and adding to their playbook. If you're going to add something, is it good enough that you want to delete something else? I think that's a good test to see like how much you actually like the idea. And I'm as guilty of this if you follow me on Twitter, I'm posting plays all the time, and I'm always tempted to say, oh, should we add this to our offense? But then at the end of the day, does it work within the previously established framework that we've agreed upon? And am I willing to delete something else I really like to put this in? And normally the answer is no. Sometimes something's so good that we have to delete something else to make it fit. But I think that's what prevents coaches from saying, we're going to keep adding and adding and adding, and all of a sudden the playbook is this massive thing that no one can understand anymore. Another thing that I've learned in my time as a coach is that it's really important to learn how to pivot. And I've said previously that coaches are teachers, which is certainly true. More than anything, coaches are problem solvers, and we're constantly realizing, running into issues throughout the course of a season, throughout the course of a career, and really trying to figure out how to solve those problems. And I think maybe the most important thing the most important benefit to yourself and your growth as a coach is to have someone who's willing to poke holes in some of your theories and challenge some of your thinking. I have a friend up at William and Mary, Kierwinham Flat, who has a great quote, and I always love reflecting back on it. He says, when your methods fail or when your idea gets shot to pieces by rational argument, you should be glad because you are no longer laboring under the misapprehension that you're right when you're wrong. I think this is such an important idea that, it's actually a blessing when someone challenges some of your thoughts and you have to go back and think about it, because it can potentially give you a better solution. And this diagram over here on your screen, it comes from Ray Dalio's book Principles, and it's really the idea that we all have these goals at the beginning of a season or the beginning of a game, and eventually we run into problems. We have to diagnose the problems, we have to design solutions, and then get back to action. And so I think for me as a coach, like I always want to be embracing reality and reality as clearly as I can. Accordingly. So, be honest about the situation and then adjust accordingly. And ultimately, like I said, football coaches are problem solvers. So we diagnose problems and we have to design solutions. And I think the more we realize that, it really humility, because the reality is, as much as we want to control things, we're going to run into issues. We're always going to run into issues. And so I think having the humility to see problems, diagnose them, and really find solutions is what separates good coaches from great coaches. And then finally, I think it's just a good reminder as we talk through all of these personal and practical ideas. Just remember, it's not about you. Ultimately, like, this game is, I believe, the greatest game in the world, because it brings together people from every background, every body type, every culture. Like, there's just so many cool things that happen on a football field that don't happen in any other sport. And you have to work together like no other sport in the world, I think. And, I think as coaches, obviously we're trying to have success. We're trying to win. We're trying to develop a sustainable culture that really benefits people long-term. But I love this Maya Angelou quote where she just said that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think as football coaches, that's really true. Like, people, 40 years, when your players come back to visit you, the reality is, even if you're on the cutting edge right now and you install all plays, by the time 40 years roll around, everyone's going to laugh at your schemes. Everyone's going to laugh at the techniques you coach because they're so old school. But people will remember the impact that you've made on them and the investment you made in them. And ultimately, did they or did they not enjoy the process of playing for you and playing in your program? And I think if we can get to the point where our players enjoy the process and we as coaches enjoy the process, then I think we've run a successful program. Not everybody can win a championship every year, but I think there are ways to set up sustainability long-term where you can really impact on people's lives. Because I don't think there's any game in the world that can have more of an impact on people's lives than the game of football. And that's part of the reason I'm involved in it. I love other sports too. I coach track. I've played basketball my whole life. I love these other sports, but there's something about football, man, that's special. And I'm sure you agree if you're on here. And not least, this is the teaching progression here at St. David's, and it's something that I really hold tightly to. I'd mentioned that speed and a focus on team speed is the foundation of our program. We talk about three things: fast, focus, and finish. And that's kind of rallying cry words for us. Really, for us as a program is human performance. And so, yes, that's developing athletes in the weight room and on the track and making sure they're the fastest, most athletic players they can be, so we can build everything from there. But human performance does not just mean the physical. We believe human performance is about developing people to be the best that they can be physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and setting them up for success every way we can. And so ultimately, like, if you are focused in on the human performance side of things, then all of a sudden you're building fundamentals, you're developing skills, you're learning concepts, you're calling plays, and then ultimately executing the plays in a given game. And so we just believe that it's important to embrace humanity, that football is a game that gets, maybe even 100 guys together on a given team, and they can work together to really make something special happen. But, you may not always get the execution you want. You may not always call the plays that you think are best. You may struggle in some of these areas, but ultimately, like, if you care about people and try to make them the best that they can be, I think you're going to have success in this game for sure. So I really appreciate the time that you guys have given me to listen, and really appreciate Coach Garcia and all the things that he's doing. And like I said, I love the game of football, and I love to see it grow all around the world. And anything I can do to support that growth is something I'm happy to do. So I appreciate you guys, and hope that this helped you in some way, and that you maybe took one or two things that you can take home with you.
Coach, it was a really nice presentation. Uh, it was really nice to hear the experience of someone that was really young when you got the first head coaching
Yeah.
job, and probably we are in that way. There is a lot of coaches that we still are in that way, and
Yeah.
we're trying to get better, and we're trying to find what other coaches are doing to try to apply to what we're doing and try to reach the highest level. And
Yeah.
we must not forget about the importance that we have to develop young athletes to get they will impact
Absolutely.
positively to the community, to give them the
Absolutely.
resources and to make them better persons, because that's what the world needs now.
Absolutely.
The world doesn't need the best athlete in the world. They need the best people in the world. So
Couldn't agree more.
through football, we can do that, and that's what I want to get into coaches in Mexico and Latin America and Europe. We worry about winning. We worry a
Hmm.
lot about winning and get the best scheme and championships and everything. But the reality is, like you said, in 40 years probably they won't remember your place. They
Right.
won't remember the schemes. They will remember the trips, how they make them
Right.
feel, how you make them feel as an athlete, the trust they gave to you, and
Absolutely.
what you give them to them. So I think it's really nice to hear from someone like you to talk about it and to give some recommendations about it. And that's what we need to do as coaches to improve, because there is a lot of information that we can get, like playbooks and recommendations about schemes and
Yeah.
everything. But I think the part of developing people is the most important thing that we need
Mhm.
to take care now.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. And, you know, I think that's why coaches have maybe the greatest responsibility in the world, because I know from my own experience playing a multitude of sports and playing for a lot of different coaches, those are some of the people that had the biggest impact on my life.
Yeah.
And I know how important a coach is in a person's life. And so, you know, I think, of course, you want to know what you're talking about, and you want to have the best schemes possible. And honestly, any way I can help you with that, I'm happy to do. I try and share as much as I can to really give people resources. But I think it really does come down to, you know, can you develop people? And I think those are the ones that have the coaches that have long-term sustained success are the ones that are developing people and building a program that churns out not just great athletes, but great community members who come back and make an impact.
Yeah, coach. And before I finish this meeting, I have three questions
Yeah.
about specifically football.
Yeah.
Um, I have some questions of the guys that follows my page, and they were talking about what do you recommend a new coach for their to establish their offensive system. What would you recommend to look for, to adapt, or what would you think, or what did you do when you established the first time your
Yeah.
offensive system?
Yeah, definitely. I think what I did, and again, I think every coach is different on this, but I think it makes sense to me at least that if you're going to start trying to figure out your offensive system, the best way to start learning is through understanding as best you can the offensive line, and specifically how to block the run game. You know, I think everything in football builds off of that. That if you can understand what's happening up front on the offensive line, that then everything can be added to that. And similar to, I always just think in terms of like pyramids make sense to me. Like you want that foundation to be to be really strong. And for me, I came in as a defensive back in college. I'd played quarterback, but I didn't think about the game I did now. But I came in as my first year as a head coach and offensive coordinator. I didn't know anything about offense other than what I did. So I started off routes. And so the off season between my first and second year as offensive coordinator, I spent all of my time trying to understand the offensive line and particularly blocking the run game. And it made a huge difference on the success of our team. The next year, we were a much better team. And I think in large part, it was because I invested so much of my time in the offensive line. And so I think that's the best thing you can do as a coach, because everything else falls into place when you figure out what's going on up front. You can understand the run game better. You can understand the pass game better. And I think too, another thing to remember, and this comes from Lincoln Riley. A lot of times as coaches, we get caught up in the idea of defeating particular defenses. So what am I going to run against cover 3? What am I going to run against cover 4? And we ended up kind of coming to the conclusion that we're in a guessing game against the defense. Like, are we going to call what's right? I think Lincoln Riley makes a good point that he says, try and make the majority of your playbook plays you can run against any defense. And so that's why I think it's really important to start up front and out what the defense is doing all the time. Try and come up with schemes that can really have options versus any coverage or any front, or I just think that's something foundational for me. Is I don't want to get in a guessing game with the defensive coordinator. I want to establish what we do and do it really well.
Okay, that's a really nice tip. The other question was, when does the adjustments in our game happens? You come up with I hear you yesterday about what you did, the way you did, and the way you do it right now. You don't wait till halftime. You're using some strategic there, but I want you to explain to the young coaches what they can do and not wait till the halftime to make an adjustment.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I've always believed this, that if you're waiting till halftime to adjust, you've waited too long. And so this really comes from, it is a Bill Belichick thing that came from, I guess, Michael Lombardi's book about Belichick, that he basically said he spends the entire first quarter trying to decide whether or not they practice the right stuff or not. And there are games where you play that first quarter and you feel really good about things and you've definitely practiced all the right things. That you didn't expect. And so I think it's important to try and diagnose those as quickly as possible. But I think the biggest thing about offensive football is having a holistic view of what's going on. And so, this goes all the way back to Barry Switzer's Oklahoma teams. And, it's kind of air raid, triple option philosophy is we want to get the defensive line running. So early on in the game, like, how do we get the defensive line running from sideline to sideline? Because I think one of the things that gets lost in all of this is that players over the course of a game get tired. And how can we take advantage of that as an offense? How can we make deposits early on that we can benefit from later? Even if you only get a 2-yard gain in the first quarter, maybe a 2-yard gain turns into a touchdown later in the game because you've made investment and deposit in making those defensive guys run and adjust and do all of these different things and tackle in space and all of those types of things. And so I think really more than anything, I think it's possible even to adjust in the middle of a drive. And that could be changing your tempo. That could be, huddling instead of going no huddle. That could be going no huddle instead of huddling. That could be, there's a variety of different ways you can do it. I just think as coaches, I think the biggest thing is that we don't outthink ourselves. And I think that goes back to the inner game that I was talking about. A lot of times we have that voice in our head creating fear and anxiety and concern instead of getting in the flow of the game. And I really believe that the best offensive coordinators have feel and get in a flow and a rhythm. And I think it's part of knowing yourself is figuring out how you best call plays. And some guys want the big menu with all their options. And for me, I have a little sheet of paper that I hold on to. And everybody has a different way of doing it, but it's about how can you do it most effectively that works with and so for me, I try to be more intuitive, and if I see things, I try and adjust immediately. With other coaches, they may script first 20 plays, and if they don't get through their script, they may come back in the second half and keep running their script, and that may work for them. I mean, I think you just have to realize that it has to work for you, and the communication style has to work for you. The rhythm of the play calling has to work for you, and you have to feel confident and believe in it. And so, but I do think that the sooner you adjust, the better off you are. It's not panicking, but it's about coming up with solutions quicker. And I think the best way to do that is to have a system in place that you can make small adjustments. You don't have to scrap your whole offense. You can say, hey, because we're getting a 4-eye here, instead of pinning him down, we're going to read him on, basically turn it into midline. There's different ways that you can make subtle adjustments in the scheme that can make a big difference. And I think that's why you see, triple option, air raid, run and shoot teams. They're able to make minor adjustments that don't throw off the whole scheme, but they're able to be effective throughout the course of a game.
Okay, coach. And the last one, what things do you consider when you are scouting another defense? Which things you look for specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I won't say I look for, but the biggest thing I look for is what kind of team speed do they have? Am I a faster team or are they a faster team? And one of the ways that we've just gotten down to simplifying the way we do things is we basically the assessment who has the faster team. And we believe there are like certain positions you're going to be slow, certain positions you're going to be faster. But overall, if we're the faster team, if we can run faster than them, then I want to get horizontal in the run game and vertical in the pass game. So I want to stretch them. That means outside zone. That means pin and pull. That means option the ball on the edge and making them the sideline. And stretching them vertically in the passing game, trying to run by people, post, Yankee, fade, they're just run by people. And I know that sounds really simplistic, but if I have the speed advantage, I might as well use it, right? And I think you saw the Chiefs do it all year last year. They had the speed advantage in every game, and they, by and large, went horizontal in the run game and vertical in the pass game, with some exception. Obviously, the NFL is a very talented league. But if we assess the film and see that we clearly do not have the speed advantage, that they're able to run us down on outside zone, they're able to really track us down and spill and kill our counter stuff, then that means we're probably going to have to get vertical in the run game and horizontal in the pass game. That means maybe more gap schemes, more inside zone. Maybe that means more outbreaking routes or crossing routes or mesh or different things like that, where we have to give guys room to get open because they're not going to threaten anyone deep. So I think it's definitely an oversimplified view of things, but I think it just gives us a direction where we're headed. And it doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions to that rule. Certainly we still run inside zone, even if we speed advantage, we're going to do things, but I think it's generally the philosophy of how are we going to stress the defense based on the speed that we have on the field or lack of speed. And I think what you're realizing more than anything nowadays in the NFL and college football and high school football is speed is king, and the fast team has an inherent advantage. And so that's why we work so hard to develop speed in our program. And so that's really the biggest thing I'm looking for in game planning. Obviously, there's matchups you can take advantage of, but I really, to the best of my ability, try to avoid. This sounds silly, but I'd rather play checkers than chess. I don't want to get so in the weeds where I'm trying to anticipate move. I just want to get on a roll and start hopping you. And so if I can simplify the game where it's not this complicated chess match, but instead I'm playing with tempo, or I'm doing things with my team's speed that out and force them to play a game, I think that benefits me in the long run.
Okay, coach. It was really, really nice to have you here. I hope we can get another meeting and will you where you can share more football stuff. But I think you need to build the foundations if you want to have some great team. So I think that's why we focus on this one. And I really appreciate you giving us your time and to share your experience and to share everything that you've been through and how can we use it to get better. And the ultimate goal, as we repeated and as we said it, is we have to develop better people through
Mm-hmm.
sports. So
Yep.
I think we're on the same road here, and I'm really thankful that you replied to my message and that I have you here talking to all the people. I hope people in Mexico, Latin America, and Europe can hear what you have to say. And probably if we can get another stuff, if we can do
Definitely.
something together, it will be really really good. So
For
thank you
sure.
really much, Coach Dan, and I hope you're okay with all the situations there in the US, and I hope that we can get over the pandemic and everything, and we get to do what we love, so that is coaching and be with our young guys and have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Coach, and see you next time.
Yes, sir. Have a good one. Bye.